And Darren says Romulans have a history of being copycats when it comes to their ship designs when you look at them as a whole. No, they don't.
Okay, let's get into this. This video is being made in direct response to a recent stream of the Anti-Trekkers, in which I attempted to describe in the chat that the Romulans of the Star Trek universe have a history of being copycats when it comes to their ship designs, when you look at them as a whole. The Anti-Trekker, as you can tell, dismissed this outright, demonstrating no curiosity at all. Now, before I get started, I'd like to ask those viewing to please wait until the end of the video before you go into the comments and start offering your 2 cents. Every time I've done this myself, I've regretted it. Just ask Trek Yards. In terms of broadcast date, the first Romulan ship we ever saw was this one, the Romulan Intruder, from the TOS episode Balance of Terror. Now, this ship does have a name that many choose to use, and that name is Romulan Bird of Prey. This name is extrapolated from a single line of dialogue from Balance of Terror in which the one-off character, Lieutenant Stiles, describes the ship to Captain Kirk.
After a whole century, what will a Romulan ship look like, Mr. Stiles? I doubt if they'll radio and identify themselves.
You'll know, sir. They're painted like a giant bird of prey.
You'll notice that Stiles does not actually name the ship, but merely describes it, stating that Romulan ships are painted like a giant bird of prey. So, what we have here is an information-hungry fan base needing to be able to call this ship something in order to discuss it amongst themselves, and in the absence of a proper name, they settled for Bird of Prey, based solely off of this line. Kirk refers to the ship in the episode as the Intruder, and that's what I tend to call it myself, but the rest of fandom isn't so discerning. Indeed, many licensed products representing this ship have also adopted the name, but licensees don't get to determine what is canon. Just as an aside, I'd also like to mention that the first time we were told anything about the Romulans, Spock had this to say.
Earth believes the Romulans to be warlike, cruel, treacherous. And only the Romulans know what they think of Earth.
Treacherous. Let's take a look at the definition of that word for just a moment. This is from dictionary.com. Normally I would be using the OED, but dictionary.com will suffice for the purposes of this trivial video. Characterized by faithlessness or readiness to betray trust, traitorous, deceptive, untrustworthy or unreliable. Forget everything that Anti-Trekker says about the TOS era Romulans being honorable and that those characteristics were transferred to the Klingons in Star Trek III. That just wasn't the case. The Romulans have been dishonorable and treacherous from the get-go. It's been said in Star Trek that Romulans prefer essentially to frame their opponents, so that it looks like their opponents are the aggressors. The Romulans can therefore justify their actions as being merely self-defense. We've seen this again and again, from the Romulans luring the Enterprise D into the neutral zone in order to justify their own planned strike against the Federation, to their attempt to occupy the Bajoran system in the middle of the Dominion War. I submit to you that if the Romulans could commit acts of aggression and make it look like someone else is doing it, they would do so. That leads us to their ship designs. Let's look at the Romulan ship from Balance of Terror again. Do you notice anything? For a long time, hardcore Star Trek fans, this might be rather difficult, but try to put yourself in the position of someone who knows next to nothing about Star Trek. They see the Enterprise and they say, oh, okay, that's the good guy ship. Then we see a Klingon battlecruiser and they say, okay, that's a bad guy ship. Then show them a Romulan Intruder, particularly from the top view. I submit to you that someone could very well think that the Romulan Intruder is a Federation starship. Unlike the Klingon vessel, it has more of the same shapes, including a saucer-like midsection, pylons, and nacelles that are very similar. They also share similar hull color. Also, keep in mind that the first time the Federation saw this ship, it was 100 years after the last time they saw a Romulan ship. The last time the Romulans saw a ship with a mostly human crew, they looked something like this. A little bit later on in the original series, we see Romulans using, quote, Klingon Designs. Interesting, right? The Romulans are using Klingon D7s here, only painted like their own ships. They're either building ships that look and function like Klingon D7s, or these D7s were acquired in some way and repurposed by the Romulans. When I first saw this episode, I thought those ships must have been captured by the Romulans and repurposed, and that's what they were using. There's no canonical proof of this, but let's just say for a moment that this is what was going on here. If the Enterprise, or the Exeter, or the Constellation had been captured by Romulans after they had gotten all of the precious information they could out of the ship, it would certainly be no surprise to me if a year later this is what they did with it. Moving along the timeline, the next time we saw a Romulan ship, it was this bad boy, the D'Deridex class Romulan Warbird. Now, what do you notice about this ship? It doesn't bear much resemblance at all to the Romulan Intruder, does it? But there is a ship that it does at least superficially resemble. This. This is a Klingon bird of prey, the primary ship of the Klingon Imperial Navy / Defense Force, from Star Trek III through Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Let's compare these two ships, and once again, pretend you don't know anything about Star Trek. Someone might say, well, they both kind of look like birds. The hull colors match. I guess they're probably of the same fleet, right? Someone could say much the same thing about the Romulan Valdor from Star Trek Nemesis as well, perhaps more so. Thanks to the show Star Trek Enterprise, we know that the Klingons had bird ships long before the Romulans did. They didn't just have a ship called a bird of prey back in the 22nd century, they also had another ship called a raptor. Raptor, incidentally, means bird of prey. Therefore, when Lieutenant Stiles said the Romulan ships were painted like a giant bird of prey, he may in fact have been referring to a Klingon bird of prey, albeit retroactively. Now let's look at one of the last Romulan ships we ever saw on proper Star Trek. This is the Romulan Marauder from the 4th season of Star Trek Enterprise. This was a drone ship controlled remotely from Romulus, and it has a rather interesting and noteworthy feature. It had holographic skin that enabled it to appear, at least visually, like one of 4 pre-programmed ship designs: an Andorian, Vulcan, Tellarite, or Terran ship. This Romulan ship was designed to look like a ship belonging to another fleet. The purpose of this ship was to destabilize the region and keep the aforementioned races at war. Does anybody else see a pattern here? The Romulans are copycats. It fits their racial profile and tactics we've seen from them all along. They like to make their ships resemble the ships of other races in an attempt to deceive and destabilize. Why? Because Romulans are pieces of shit, that's why. Now, this little Romulan copycat idea does have one major problem. For that problem, we have to look once again at the idiot little brother of Star Trek shows known as Star Trek Enterprise. There is an excellent episode of Enterprise called Minefield, in which the NX-01 encounters what turns out to be a Romulan minefield, and we see this.
The arming mechanism's extending. Captain.
We see it, Malcolm. activate the beacon.
Well, shit. As much as I like this episode, it does have the unhappy byproduct of shooting a great big hole right through the head of the Romulan copycat idea. I can't come up with a canonical way of fixing this or explaining this. There was, of course, the temporal Cold War with its many alternate reality factions, but there was nothing in this episode that suggested that the Romulans we saw weren't from Enterprise's own timeline. In the third season, a bona fide Star Trek fan named Manny Koto took over the show and began turning things around. One of the stories I'd heard at various cons when Enterprise was running was that Koto had plans in the fifth season for fixing all of the canon violations that took place in Enterprise's first 2 seasons. These violations were the result of writing errors, unlike what we find in STD, which I'm convinced are intentional. Unfortunately, due to the show being cancelled by Les Moonves, Koto never got his 5th season, which we later found out was going to have a redesigned NX-01, temporal Cold War loose ends tied up, and the revelation that T'Pol was only half Vulcan, among other things. I want to give a special shout out to the Anti-Trekker, without whom none of this video would have been possible, in more ways than one. Thank you for your attention.